just glad to be here. I work with a nonprofit organization called Help Change My City, and we're going to schools and teaching young people that they're valuable, they have skills and abilities and talents that they can use to help them become successful in life. And then we define success as being able to take care of yourself, the community, and beyond. And that's the heart of what we do. And I've been privileged to be able to partner with people like Andrew and George and many other principals, Tupper, John Oliver, different schools that have been able to allow me to come in and speak to the young people to let them know that they can make a difference in their lives, in the lives of the community in their schools and beyond. I'm enjoying it. And what I love about this Decentering Whiteness is the fact that we can look for more ways to communicate as people coming from different backgrounds, everybody, and being able to look out for people that need to be recognized, people of color, and beyond that. But all of us being able to recognize one another. Literally, what I usually say, we all have to come to the table to have a discussion. And that's what we're doing here. It doesn't matter our background, our race. We're sitting at the table to say, how can we know what's in the past, discuss it, feel the pains of it, and also know what is present, discuss it, feel the pains of it, and then say, how can we move forward together? And that's what I love about it. I'm able to hear all voices, and I'm glad to be here. Is that good enough, sir? Good, sir?
100%.
Did I say too much?
100%. No, that's awesome. Thanks, Alpha. And then George, are you out there? I can't hear you. I'm not sure if your microphone is on or if you're speaking through your phone. I'm not sure.
Hold on. Are you okay? Hold on. You can't hear me.
No, that's good. You're beautiful. Okay, maybe you'll come back just now. In the meantime, for people who are new to this group, session 6 that we're looking at now, we've moved from sessions 1, 2, and 3, where we were focusing on the experience of white racism from us and white positionality, and how that translates in different areas of our work that we do here in Vancouver and in different parts of North America. We've had folks coming in from Toronto area and so on. We've also looked at Indigenous experience with Glenn Coulthard. We've had keynote speakers giving different aspects of their experience and trying to enrich and break us away from an education school-based focus. Because as you know, I think both George and I are in the same secondary school working together. George representing a member of the Vancouver Secondary Teachers Association, the union side, and I represent the management side within the school. But we're trying to find ways to have a dialogue around some of these issues. And we also feel that it's important as white men, we understand and we work around our focus to decenter the kind of hegemonic positions which we have come and grown up with. You can hear my accent. I'm South African. I grew up in the racist society. The first schools that I was in and administered and worked in were still within the old racist system. And I share some of that learning along the way. The last 2 sessions were really looking again at decentering whiteness and the hegemonic white paradigm. And let's talk a little bit about that now. I want to see if we can go to the next slide. Let's see if that works for me. Yeah, so in the past, we hoped that people would read different chapters, and we hoped that we would have more of a dialogue around these. That hasn't really worked very well in the previous sessions. But if people have been able to read, or if you still can read, or have an intention of coming back to this over the summer, Vandana Shiva's Reclaiming the Commons, in particular chapters 5 to 7, are phenomenal around some of this decentering. And Vandana takes forward some of the arguments and positions that we were looking at earlier. But centrally, she, and along with some of our earlier readings, help us to decenter the white frames of knowledge, and I'm using white in quotation marks there, the frames of knowledge that originate from the West and from Europe. And so we'll look at that a little bit. And then if people have additional time or when something shorter, Miranda's piece on indigenous musicians in Brazil was fantastic, with some remarkable young people's bands and music. You might want to look at that. And we'll carry on with some of the other viewing, etc. just now. But I just want to spend, if you don't mind, a few minutes as we move into the pathways and decentering whiteness. A big influence for me and for us, I think, has been the Black consciousness movement from South Africa and within South Africa. And a key person that helped to shift the struggle in South Africa against apartheid was this man, Stephen Biko, who was killed in September 1977. And as you know, the song, there's the famous song about Biko. And this is the man who was involved with that. And as a student, Stephen Biko, a doctor, a medical student, started the Black consciousness movement, which was, like I said, fundamental in shifting the consciousness of people in South Africa towards an understanding of liberation and self-liberation. He worked in NUSAS, the National Union of South African Students, and he then moved over and formed the South African Students Organization. And then out in East London, down on the coast, the southern coast, he started the Black community projects in some of the townships out in around East London and Port Elizabeth. And those were really community empowerment projects and cooperatives. And for that, he was arrested and then tortured and killed in South African prisons. Biko drew back on some of the founding thinkers in Africa, Leopold Senghor, Kwame Nkrumah, and the Negritude movement of the 1960s and 70s. And then if we move his dialogue forward, it's some of the key aspects of that are today captured within the Afrofuturist movement. And so when people say, well, what do you mean by decentering whiteness? I, as a white South African, would say, well, I think I would turn to someone like Biko for inspiration and guidance. And then people say, oh, what about something practical? Well, there's something very practical in what Steve Biko was doing. And similarly, some of the earlier book material that we've read and worked with, like Glenn Coulthard's work and some of the Decenter work that we've shared in earlier sessions, and those are available for recording. There are people of color who are much better able to express what we might mean by moving beyond this. And this is where Vandana Shiva, for example, came up. Because when Vandana speaks about decentering and the pathways forward and out, Vandana and Biko and Glenn Coulthard and Alpha and people are saying, what we've got to decenter is the whole panoply of Western philosophy. Because Western philosophy and Western beingness have lost our legitimacy through slavery and colonialism. We cannot speak from a moral position anymore from that. And then Afrofuturists and Vandana Shiva, they put a circle around that whole Enlightenment so-called thing. And they put slavery and colonization and the logic of capitalism, privatization of space and human bodies inside that circle, the selling of human bodies inside that circle. And that's the logic of enclosure that Vandana Shiva speaks about. And so if you have the time to get hold of Vandana's work and that work, you'll see how she speaks about enclosure as being a fundamentally Western thing. And a fundamental part of the whole Western capitalist movement has been around enclosure, and then enclosure for selling, and the enclosure of bodies. And as Alpha was reciting, was reflecting in our very first session, and some of the consequences in his village that his grandmother was able to speak about. So it's imagining outside that circle that the Soweto uprisings, which very much came from Steve Biko and many other colleagues in South Africa, that was imagining outside that circle of white hegemonic thinking. moving on a little bit, I'll see if I jump into the next slide. Another one of the people that we've looked at in the very first session, but we didn't look at this book of Mbembe's. Akil Mbembe is a Cameroonian philosopher working currently in South Africa. Phenomenal scholar and thinker dealing with just this topic. In his book, Out of this Dark Night, Akil points out the times are propitious for big questions concerning the relation of time, the relation of human life to planetary life. And that was the very first session that we had. The very first or second session that we had when we looked at Dipesh Chakraborty's work. This is exactly what Akil is saying now. The times are propitious for big questions concerning the relation of human life to planetary life. As a matter of fact, the destiny of our planet will be played out to a large extent in Africa. This planetary turn of the African predicament will constitute the main cultural and philosophical event of the 21st century. And Akil goes into that and explains why he takes that position. But increasingly, what he's also saying is that what's happening at the moment in this propitious time for big questions is how the West is becoming increasingly African, to use quotation marks, in the Western experience. That we can explore a bit further, I think, in other sessions. But what Mbembe is doing, he's linking, of course, he's linking the thinking of Shiva, and he's linking people like the Black Consciousness movement. So Shiva, in her article, in her book, says that something that's fairly new is not new. It's a pretty old argument. There's a continuum of life. Yeah, we got that. Life is interrelated. Many folks have been arguing that. Van Dan is a biologist as well, and she talks to that. But where she pushes it further is that, and she traces it back, the interrelatedness. She moves away from a biologist and a Western science paradigm, and she brings in her own indigenous perspective from her community in India, and she relates that to future worldviews. And then, as I alluded earlier, there are the enclosures that create exclusions, and these exclusions are for very good reason from the point of view of the people who are creating the enclosure. And then she suggests that her notion of Earth democracy helps us reclaim our common humanity with all life. It protects the ecological processes that maintain life and the fundamental human rights that are the basis of that right to life. And then she suggests that we move from cultures of death to cultures of life. And the Earth democracy for her would be a culture of life. And the cultures of death would be what Mbembe called necropolity in one of his earlier books that we looked at 2 years ago with this group. So it's exactly the same notion that philosophers and scholars in Africa and India are speaking about. The Western paradigm is centrally a culture of death. It's a death worshipping paradigm. And I think I have to agree with that. And speaking from my experience as a white South African and having seen what we did in South Africa during that time, during the time of the liberation struggle. One other piece that I think comes up is the notion of post-humanism. And that for many philosophers and scholars, the notion of the humanist philosophy was very much part of the Enlightenment philosophy. And so humanism and the Enlightenment are really within that circle of a Western paradigm. And to decenter that and then explore ways how we can organize a school and organize our relationships within a school demands that we move into a post-humanist society or post-human way of thinking, which is quite decentering, and I struggle with that. I think I'm going to stop for a few minutes of just giving the background to where we're at today. And I know there are some amazingly interesting people out there, and I've said a heck of a lot right now. Does anyone have any thoughts or any questions which we might want to just look at and talk about for a few minutes? please, if you don't mind, just pop on your cameras and we can talk. Denise, do you have any thoughts?
No, I'm joining for the first time. The other sessions overlapped with some of my other duties, so I'm here to meet a few people and just be an observer and a listener.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks so much for joining us. And sorry you couldn't make the other ones. Ishare, what's your first name? Is Ishare? Is that your first name?
First name is Eric. Also, first time joining. I first heard about this yesterday through a teacher, through a faculty sponsor through UNBC.
Oh, wow.
The land of the Lheidli T'enneh.
Oh, fantastic. And where are you located at the moment?
Colonial name is Prince George, the traditional lands of the Lheidli T'enneh.
Oh, fantastic. So were you working with Glenn Coltard?
Sorry, unfortunately, no.
Oh, wow. Well, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us. And it's unfortunate that you weren't some of our earlier sessions because, well, we've had fascinating conversations as much as we can. But thank you for joining us. Hira, you're another new person. Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. I got this session from my coworkers a week ago, and I'm working with smaller kids. So I thought it was a good opportunity to know how to work with the kids who are white. And I'm on Hornby Island, and most of the kids are white, and I'm the only person who are colored. So yeah, I want to get a sense of this workshop, and I want to, practice in ECE settings.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay. So thanks so much. One of the things that George and I sort of struggle with is how much do we talk about school interventions, classroom-based interventions, the nuts and bolts, how much are we working at a bigger picture, framework and paradigm, and how much do we speak about our school experiences here at McGee Secondary, which is on the Musqueam territory, and how do we work within a resurgence or a reconciliation politics, and so what does that actually mean for classroom organization and curriculum and implementation of curriculum with teacher autonomy? So all of those are kinds of questions, and some colleagues are not in the secondary world or in tertiary sector or doing a PhDs in different research, and we want to try to make it valuable for everyone. So Hiro, I think thank you so much for joining us as well, and that your unique context of the island and the nature of your island, the historical trajectory of the island, and life in a very small community like that is so different to our experience here in the middle of a very wealthy community, Kerrisdale, in Vancouver. But what's important for George and my reflection, and Alpha as well, who's done quite a lot of work in our school, is the history of our school and the depth hermeneutics of our school, the deep narratives of this school, and what this school tells itself about itself. And one of the things that we did quite soon when I came here was take down the wall of white principles, because there were all these old white guys going back 120 years. And those narratives, when 1/3 of the school are from Asia, and they're looking at all of these white guys looking pretty grumpy, quite honestly. And the kids, these teenagers are saying, I got to become like that. I got to look like that to be successful in this world. And so over spring break, we whipped that wall down. And then COVID started and we put up a big, what's called a Hope mural, a beautiful work of art that was done by grade 11, 12 students, kind of graffiti art with hope and just a beautiful piece. And that, I think, was a big cognitive shift for all of us in the school, is how oppressed we were by that wall of white faces. And then when boom, up came the Hope mural, and that we've now moved. And now that wall has got a beautiful carving by Musqueam artists, Chris and Crystal Sparrow. And it's what we're trying to decenter the whole understanding of history in the school, which was very white-centered. And the name of the school was the first settler, Farmer McGee, and he grabbed up a massive chunk of land around here, and 110 years ago. And the whole centering was around McGee and Farmer McGee and the white politics and white power. And it's increasingly we're trying to see how do we use reconciliation or resurgence narratives. And when we use that language in the school, and when I speak in a staff meeting and we talk about militant professionalism, and how does your admin team support militant professionalism within the school? And the militant professionalism, I use that word on purpose because of the history of the BCTF that I'm not a member of, and I'm not allowed to be a member of because of history again. But the BCTF's role in liberation struggle in South Africa was massive. And the creation of the international desk in the BCTF in the 70s was massive, massive support. Similarly in Chile and Central and South America. There's a massive, massive understanding of the importance of internationalism. And that was huge for me in South Africa in the 1980s and 1990s, knowing that there are people out there that care and that support what's going on here and that are opposed to the racist power that was in South Africa. So all of those narratives kind of intersect for me in a staff meeting earlier on to go along and say, oh, we expect militant professionalism. How can I support militant professionalism? And I expect the teachers to say to me, Andrew, you talk about militant professionalism, but you're not supporting us in the following ways. And call me on my stuff. And we have a trusting relationship and a powerful enough relationship that's established over 5 years of us being here, where we can work together to build those kinds of trusting, safe spaces where we can be called on my power stuff, when I fall into that. So that's I think how we try to bring a decentering perspective into a school in a very, very affluent bourgeois neighborhood. Are we
Hey, Andrew.
Yeah, go for it.
Andrew's church. Denise wrote a really nice comment. And Denise, I hate to put you on the spot, but if you could read it out, I'm sure Andrew would love to expand it.
Well, Andrew had me thinking because I grew up near Carisdale and attended those schools with the rows of grumpy looking white men on the wall. And, I think about the changes that, first we moved to, wasn't it a bit of an oddity to have women amongst our administrative group? And then numbers of us, very few, that had some Indigenous ancestry. But it's not reflective of who, thank goodness, our school populations are becoming, even here in the Kootenays. Our students, our Indigenous students and students of color don't see their faces reflected in very many of their teachers or administrators.
Mm-hmm. And I think we've got a lot of there's a flight of stairs in the school that goes from the ground floor up to the second floor where the library is. And on the rise of those stairs, we had Deborah Sparrow work together with some of our senior art students, putting on the rise a whole series of designs drawing on Musqueam weaving symbolism. And then in some poles in an atrium, similar designs are on those poles. And then where the white guys used to be, and there's now the spindle whirl with the male and female salmon carved by Chris and Crystal Sparrow. And then on either side of that, we've got a sun and a moon carved by Jimmy Joseph from Alert Bay. And then next to that, there's going to be a plaque which describes what's going on there. On the underneath of the stairs, we've got a beautiful piece that was done by kids in the Learning Assistance and Life Skills class on reconciliation that they did down at the Museum of Anthropology using some of Susan Point's work. So all over the place, we're wanting to use subconscious messaging rather than having more African and indigenous teachers and administrators and all the rest. Well, we're not there yet, but we can also go along and have masses of the house post that is being carved in front of the school. That spindle wheel just in front of the school, we've got a big board where we're going to be having a one-to-one representation of that along with the artist's statement. So when members of the public walk through beautiful leafy Kerrisdale, they're going to see that artist's statement, and then they're going to see the house post. And with the Musqueam Nation, there's a symbolic taking back of the land. And the centrality of land, you guys up in Dene territory understand that, and Kootenays, you understand that. The centrality of land, it's been a theme in what we've discussed here. And here, you guys out on the island, you understand the land perspective and the history of that land and the colonial history of that land. But we can also go along and work together with the local nations to give the land back, give it back spiritually, and create that space of ownership and how that works. And so that even if we have one Indigenous kid coming to our school, it's rich with the whole symbolism of the local nation. Something that we were talking about and that we wanted to do was on our business cards, just drop the word Vancouver. Just put the word Musqueam. We're on Musqueam territory, put the word Musqueam. And initially I wanted to use the word Sisnayem, which is the name of the huge village just down the road here. But when I spoke with colleagues from the nation, they said, no, I'll rather just use this word. So it's in that dialogue, we can just decenter whiteness where we can, right, on our business cards. And this is what, the point earlier on that Sheree was mentioning is perfect. It's so-called Prince George. Yeah, who even knows who that prince was? We don't know. So I think it's just we drop the name on our business cards, and where we can, we give the land back, spiritually, symbolically, and metaphorically. Other comments there, George? Do you see anything? I can't monitor the comment side.
No, nothing new there. No new comments, but I'm sure the conversation will get going. So please, everybody, feel free. Even if you don't want to say anything into the speaker just yet, put it in the comments, and then we can put you on the list to speak. But no obligation to. So please feel free.
It's also awesome having seeing people's faces. That's a good thing too. On the continuum of life and the interrelatedness of life, I mean, Fritjof Capra was writing about that back in the late 80s. I don't know if some of you guys might have read some of Fritjof Capra's work, but what's unique about Shiva and Akila Mbembe and Glenn Coulthard and more of the indigenous and third world scholars is relating the shifts that are going on in ontology and epistemology to indigenous experience and indigenous ways of being. And I think that's what makes things so important and different, and where us settler folks have to create a space and keep quiet and listen. And George and I have been quite mindful in trying to create that space and not having more white guys coming in as keynote facilitators who use the space to build their resumes, as little as they do, but that's the politics of the institution. And so moving from a university to a pluriversity is another concept and term which has come across, George and I have come across in some of the reading and thinking and discussion, and how that actually works as our school, as a pluriverse, and respecting and honoring the different languages and traditions and histories that come into our pluriverse. How do we knit that together in a community? And George and I were involved in that just earlier on today when we had a collaboration time, and all of our teachers were together having a collaboration around the new marks and assessment framework and how that could go very sideways as a dialogue. And it could become quite acrimonious, quite easily acrimonious. And similarly, in our staff committee meeting with 30 teachers in a staff committee meeting, out of a staff of 50 teachers. And it wasn't an acrimonious conversation. It's passionate, it's good dialogue. Nobody takes it personally. It's not a staff admin dialogue. And so we've got to a place of really good, profound trust, I think. It's quite unique. What I would hope would be a culture of life rather than a culture of death or necropolity. I think if we can move on, I'm not sure if this will come out. And I mentioned Afrofuturism and MST futurism, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh futurism. If this video works,
Andrew,
yeah,
sorry for cutting you off.
no problem.
But we had, I think it was Christine. I can't see both screens at once. I can double check, but she had she wanted to ask you a question. Christine, if you're up for it, can you go on the mic and share your thoughts and your question?
Sure. I'm just literally taking this meeting on remotely traveling in my car. So just know that. So thanks for hosting this and really grateful to be here. I'm just wondering about, and I know that you're sort of, hesitant or making a balance between talking about schools, but I'm just wondering what, and this is just more of a question. I don't have examples to share, but just the idea of decentering whiteness in policies and practices that we have in schools. I think that, I'll just say in the tiny or the minutia of things, like, for example, I think about the 4-block tumble or the 4-block structure in secondary. I'm just using that as an example. I'm thinking about even you're having a new reporting order that's being implemented in September. And I wonder, I'm like, okay, I see, for a better word, incremental changes, but I'm just, I really appreciate what you just said. Like, we will not have Black educators, Indigenous educators. We're not there yet. We're trying to get there. And so the things that we can do in symbolic ways at this point in time as a step towards reconciliation, as a step towards representation and seeing self in schools, I'll say that, is great. And I'm just thinking about, policies and practices that we really adhere to, which sort of leans on culture of schools, and we just widely accept them because we've been part of them. And yet, how do we, I'm just wondering if you have any examples about, and I think you've shared a few, but just, in terms of that, like, how can we, school culture shift what is? And I think that we're trying, but I don't know. I'm just sort of, I think we try, but I feel like, for those science folks out there, it's like an equilibrium. Like, you try, but then it shifts back again. And like, how do you actually keep that momentum moving forward?
Christine, that's a fantastic question. I mean, I think that everyone out here have got, we all think and find a muse on that. Alfred, do you want to come in there, brother?
Yes, I think that's a great question. And I think it's really by not what they call virtue signaling, which is a new term nowadays, but it's really by calling all people to come to the table. I'm not calling them to the table so you can say we have enough, so we have 3 Black people on the table and we have 3 Indigenous people, so that we don't want to go that route. We really have to be able to have them on the table and hear their voice, not creating their voice for them, but hearing their voice. One of the things that makes this conversation really healthy that we're having here in this group is that everyone can speak, and we can listen to and take to thought the words that they say. We must take to thought the words that they say. Sometimes organizations, entities, institutions are forced to do certain things so they can look good because suddenly George Floyd has died. So we shell out a little bit of money I don't know, a couple $1 million to students that look a certain way, or we start to take pictures with individuals that look a certain way so that we can fit into that picture that we're okay. But I think the way we start to change that by doing a heart invitation, and an intentional invitation, and invite the people to the table with good intention. What does that look like? That looks like saying, that looks at what do they have to say about what is happening? And that therefore, if we start to listen long enough, with that true intention, then we'll be able to involve their voice in our policies. We'll be able to involve their pain in our policies, meaning that not just kind of pointing out that we gave out such and such amount of scholarships to people of this community and the like, or people of, women. Sometimes we had a conversation with one of my friends, and I said that I'm tired of going into boardrooms, meaning institutions, or organizations, whatever they may be, whereby people say, we have women on our board. Well, do you? And what does that look like when the only woman on the board is related to the founder of the organization? Does that count? Right? Because they're going to inherit this whole thing. I think that being intentional and willing to listen so that we can move forward is the key. And our policies will follow our intention. So that's why I love that question. I'm going to stop right there.
I think
Alpha, you're so, oh, sorry.
I just wanted to say I loved the answer too. Like, thank you for that. I really appreciate that.
go, George.
I was just going to add, Alpha, as always, so great with words, and you're just so pragmatic and real. So thank you for that. And yes, we do have a long way to go, but I've seen some very encouraging signs in the way Andrew runs our school. He is our leader. We recognize him as our leader, but he's also our colleague. And it's just so great. And we have a room full of teachers, and it's very multicultural now, the teachers, which quite different than many years ago. And Andrew helps guide it. And we've come a long way, and we're going to keep going. So thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Alpha, for just summing it up so well.
If I can push it a little bit more there, Christine, Alpha's answer, I think, was brilliant from a phenomenological level, right? In terms of strategies for working within the moment. The other key one would be a very materialist understanding of where you're at and where your colleagues are at. And a materialist understanding of the structures that we're within. And when we see issues and incidents cropping up in the school, I'm trying to look and understand the structural mechanism that's generating a situation and that's flopping it over, and using a Marxist analysis and trying to understand those structures that generate the epiphenomenon, which might be a fight or a reaction. Or I've got 6 boys who are being suspended for a video that they made. Let me understand the dynamics of that group, and the different dynamics within that group, the dynamics of power. The grade 12 boy who might be driving a Mercedes, and the grade 11 boy who might be plural, who might be new immigrants, and what are the dynamics of power within the group that have generated a certain video that was made? And then do I have the same approach to discipline? Do they all get the same suspension? Or how do I then lobby that and work that, Christine, with families who might say, well, they all should be suspended the same way? Well, that's only if I understand a Western concept of power and experience. Yes, everyone, one for all and all for one. But if we understand a more nuanced, dialogically based notion, I then have to mediate. And there's no such thing as punishment. There's reflection on our experiences. And so, Christine, coming to the specific of your question with the new ministerial reporting order and the bureaucratic, technocratic frameworks, administrative procedures that we are bound by, we work within those frameworks, but within them we find ways to be creative by listening and by bringing in, as Alpha is suggesting, to work with those rules and those laws and those structures to liberate us. And we don't see the rules. Sometimes we break rules here. No, we don't. We don't break any rules. We might ignore them. We might not know that they exist. In South Africa, there was a phrase we used to use all the time in the liberation movement: do the unexpected. And when we would go into meetings and it was always like, do the unexpected. So that was another axiom of political change in South Africa. And then what Alpha is doing is I find I'm more in tune with that here in North America and in Canada. I don't know if that helps. Understanding history, the history of place, the history of your school and how that has come to be, and then working and seeing where we can use the stuff coming from the ministry when it changes. I don't know if that makes sense or complicates things.
No, I really appreciate those points because it's not, I guess in the bigger picture, what I'm hearing is that it's not as simple as turning something on and off. It's not, it's that it's so deeply embedded, not just in history, but why we do things, how we do things, and the complexities of being who we are and how we got here. So I just really appreciate those two examples. So thank you for addressing them.
There was an experience I had in a township school north of Pretoria, and Soshanguve Township, and next to the school buildings, and this is just an informal settlement, a squatter camp, right? An informal settlement. And on the road leading up to this sort of school structure, and there was a pile of little metal heaps. And because I did archaeology and as a kid with my long story, there were slag heaps that in the old days, in the late Iron Age, before the settlers arrived, it is where the metal workers were smithing metal and forging metal back in the day. And I walked by that and then I said to the principal, I said, Meneer, do you understand, do you see this? And it just that understanding of place totally changed the whole ethos and culture in that school. And how then the little ones, it was an elementary school, they would come out and that whole reconnection of ancestry occurred around that realization of what this was and the forgotten narratives that had occurred there. And was an interesting experience around the deep stories that we sometimes aren't aware of inside a school. And so here at McGee and at my previous school, Britannia, down in the closer to the center of the city, a more working class community, really try to understand how those tapestries came to be in the life of a school, and how we can take that history and change it and move it in different directions. So I don't know if that helps, but that it's a little bit of the hidden curriculum that we follow here. We try to follow. Any other points? I hope that this works for you guys. And this is an interesting thought piece which was put together as part of the MST Futurism movement. And it's about a year or two old. Let's see if we can play it and let's see if you can hear the sound. I hope it works. Otherwise, we'll post the link and perhaps just watch it. I think it's about 8 minutes.
Hello, my name is Crystal Paribu, and I am a curator. I am a historian. I am an art historian and a writer.
It's working, Andrew.
And I'm coming to you today to give you a very quick background on Afrofuturism. I was born on Turtle Island, also known as Canada, on the Iroquoian and Algonquian territories. And I am of mixed race descent, so Afro-Jamaican, Indo-Guyanese, and Euro-Portuguese. Afrofuturism, in essence, evaluates the past and future to create better conditions for the present generation of Black people. This is done through the use of technology, and it's often presented through various forms of art, music, literature, but essentially it's an aesthetic and philosophical reimagining of futures full of arts, full of sciences and technology, and most importantly, it's told from a Black lens. The aim of Afrofuturism is to redefine and reconstruct Blackness and Black identity within a framework of Black culture. So it's essentially built by Black people for the benefit of Black people. It's essentially a fluid ideology that is shaped by generations of artists and musicians and scholars and activists. And the aim for everyone is to just reconstruct Black identity and cities and futures. For a very quick pop culture reference, think of Janelle Monáe and her album Dirty Computer, and then think of Black Panther and the African country Wakanda that was built with its high technological advancements for Black people by the Black people. We also see Afrofuturism in the form of literature. So American author Octavia E. Butler is often referred to as the mother of Afrofuturism, as her science fiction novels tend to dive into and express forms of Afrofuturism. For those of you wondering why we don't just call Afrofuturism sci-fi, well, when you think about the historical origins of science fiction, it begins to make sense. Not only is it heavily Eurocentric and white male dominated, but it was developed during the Industrial Revolution, during the Enlightenment era, and during the slave trade era, whereas Afrofuturism is essentially a response to the transatlantic slave trade and its experiences, as well as scientific racism such as eugenics and white supremacy as a whole. So let's get into the historical roots of Afrofuturism. We first heard this term in 1993. It was first used by American author Mark Derry, but he doesn't get credit for its conception, obviously. Although our understanding of Afrofuturism is within a more contemporary framework that's rooted in futuristic concepts such as technology and sciences, it's important to understand that as a concept, so conceptually, it has historical roots that go back to the transatlantic slave trade that have appeared in different movements. For almost 500 years, African bodies were stolen, dehumanized, and treated as commodity by Europeans for the purpose of building the Western world. This displaced Africans of various tribes working on plantations across the Caribbean, America, and even Canada. As time went by, the descending bloodlines of those enslaved became more and more disconnected from their African roots. Their only identity existed through a colonial lens as slaves, perpetuated by white supremacy. So as a result, various Pan-African movements began as a means of looking towards reimagining a future that reconnected with their unknown African roots, free of enslavement, free of white supremacy. Garveyism is an example of one of these movements. It was a Black nationalist movement that was led by Jamaican political activist Marcus Garvey in the early 1920s. And it focused on the unification and economic empowerment of those of African descent. It specifically called for reparations for African slave descendants and profits to the African continent. Rastafarianism is another example. It is a pro-African movement that developed into a spiritual religion. Yes, it's a religion. That's why we tell you you can't wear dreadlocks. Rastafarian preachings would teach about the superiority of African peoples and a disdain for Europeans who at the time were slave owners. And it was encouraging Black people to return to their motherlands in Africa. It originated in Jamaica, similar to Garveyism. And Marcus Garvey himself was actually one of the founders of Rastafarianism, and he taught that Africans were the lost tribe of the Israelites, and that Christ would be born again on earth, but this time as a king in Africa. And that king was interpreted to be Haile Selassie I of Ethiopia. If you're a fan of Bob Marley's music, then I'm sure you've heard the term Babylon. And Babylon refers to the power structures and culture of white society throughout the world. Rastafarians actually talked about the sins of Babylon and sought the divinity of Ethiopia as a way to escape white supremacy, so Babylon, and a way back to Africa. So aspects such as wearing dreadlocks and smoking marijuana were all religious symbols used to disconnect from white supremacy and reconnect with African roots. So when we think about Afrofuturism within a contemporary context, obviously Black people are not physically in shackles anymore. However, systemically and socially, they definitely are marginalized. Afrofuturism is an attempt to look towards modern tools and modern concepts to build a new world and escape modern enslavement. So when we focus on the history of Afrofuturism on Turtle Island, aka Canada, some major players are Quentin Versetti, who is a Montreal-based artist, and he's been at the forefront of the Afrofuturist movement in Canada for years. His current developing body of work is all about what he calls artivism, and so using social art for change, but through an Afrofuturistic lens, and he explores speculative narratives that challenge ideas of who is visible or invisible to address issues of representation, youth generation inclusion, immigration, mobility, alienation, and the lack of what he calls PDAA. So that's public display of affection for African. Quentin Versetti has an installation piece called Think Tomorrow, which essentially was on display at a few Eastern Canadian universities. And it's actually one of my favorite of his. He essentially just created devices for the detection of racial appropriation and anti-Blackness. And it also was used as a digital encyclopedia in a sense to teach and understand the dangers and the effects of anti-Blackness and racial appropriation, and how insensitive acts can cause harm to others and adversely affect future generations. So they were essentially 3D print models of the devices, and they were displayed along propaganda poster ads that were scattered amongst them. Quentin Versetti is actually one of the artists who are spearheading the Canadian chapter of the Black Speculative Arts Movement, which is actually the largest body in Canada spearheading the Afrofuturism movement, specifically within art. It's based in Toronto, and the movement seeks to interpret, engage, and design or alter the reality for the reimagination of the past and the contested present that we're currently living in, and act as a catalyst for the African diasporic future. Their latest project is called Afrofuturism 2.0, The Rise of Astro-Blackness. And it's an emerging pan-African, transnational, trans-contextual, techno-cultural, social philosophy characterized by other dimensions that include African or African diasporic metaphysics, aesthetics, social sciences, such as Afrocentricity, Black and African feminist and womanist thought, and Black queer practice. Dr. Reynaldo Anderson, one of the founders of BSAM, describes Afrofuturism 2.0 as a concept that builds on the first Afrofuturism movement beginning in the mid-1990s that is combining science fiction, music, and technology to imagine a fictionalized society through the arts. It's definitely a global 21st century Pan-African response to the growth specifically of social media platforms and digital technologies. We all should know at this point that Hogan's Alley was the first neighborhood occupied by the first Black community in so-called Vancouver, and just a place where the Black community lived, thrived, and prospered. And it was destroyed when the city decided to put up viaducts. There's been an influx in Black art in Vancouver through muralism, through digital art, different forms of media art, and Black artists are all over the city working towards reclaiming the roots and cultures from the first Black community that came to occupy Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh lands. We have amazing organizations in the city that are working towards building a better Black future in different ways, and even collectively at times. And this includes Black Lives Matter Vancouver, Hogan's Alley Society, Ethos Labs, the BC Community Alliance, Afro-Van Connect, and so many more. The aspect that excites me the most about Afrofuturism is a reclaimage of culture and thus humanity. Essentially, just the dismantling of anti-Blackness is what excites me the most. And, you know, when you think about what anti-Blackness is and all the forms that it comes in, not only does seeing and supporting Black people in multiple roles outside of the stereotypical Black identities excite me, but the innovation that those identities can collectively build and develop when liberated and given the resources to do so is the most exciting thought. There are endless possibilities of a future of expressionism and true liberation in a decolonized world. Who knows what that type of Black empowerment can do for the future of humanity as a whole. When I think about what would be the most incredible expression of Afrofuturism in city building, I think of, you know, communal spaces and community centers that are skilled, focused for Black people. So utilizing the latest technology, engineering designs, and even decarbonized building operations to reimagine a sustainable environment that fosters Black joy and Black development in various industries, but all in concurrence with elements of the natural environment of the city itself. I want to see neighborhoods that don't necessarily have basketball courts, but that have hubs to foster advancements in tech so that we can have an influx in future Black leaders in tech. You know, alongside studio and open spaces and labs that provide resources to Black artists and scientists, and, you know, having all the architecture and designs within influenced by certain shapes and colors and patterns of the African and Caribbean diaspora. A last note that I really want to say is it's important when thinking about Indigenous futurism to always pay homage to Black people who created Afrofuturism and have created different forms of reimagining Black futures to escape marginalization and oppression for centuries, really. It's important to really honor what Black people do for activism and building futures in general. And so I just really want you to keep that in the back of your mind as you go through with any visions for future projects for yourself and for your community. Thank you for being gracious hosts to me here on these unceded territories belonging to the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I am in full support of the Land Back movement, and I graciously thank you for allowing me to build community, to create art, and to work and build a life on these territories that belong to you. I look forward to any future collaboration of creating intersections between Afrofuturism and Indigenous futurism. You know, we're all in this decolonized game together, and I think it would only benefit both communities if we really uplift each other and contribute to each other's movements. So thank you.
That came from a conference on MST, Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh futurism about a year ago. And when this slide deck is uploaded, you'll be able to get hold of that. And if you want to follow up through YouTube, and the link is also there. A quick piece. In what we earlier on, I cited Akil Mbembe. And one of his comments was decolonization is the praxis of self-defense and as an experience of emergence and uprising. And I think what the Afrofuturist and the MST, the Indigenous futurist movements in North America are pushing is just that it's part self-defense, but also part of the experience of emergence and uprising. As the phrase, the word you might have heard in there as well, which you might have picked up was the decentering word. Decentering based on a recognition and understanding of history and the violence of history, but also the potential of the future. Another one of the pieces of film and video that we looked at 2 or 3 sessions ago for new people is the film Invasion. And if you want to look it up on YouTube, Invasion, but if you type in just Invasion, you'll get a whole bunch of gobbledygook from other things. But link it to the Gitxsan land and Gitxsan land defenders. If you type in those words, you'll come across a fantastic 17-minute film about the land defense and the experience of emergence and uprising on the Gitxsan territories. And there's some fantastic pieces of film in there which show the profound disconnect between the settler way of understanding and thinking and the Gitxsan defense of their territory against an oil pipeline. So please watch that, because that's another example in terms of what practically can we look at and that we can draw on in different ways, in different places. That Invasion film is remarkable. The folks, the Gitxsan Nation, encourage us to use that in workshops. There's some questions which I've used here at McGee in a semester turnaround experience for our students to help them understand and be allies to land defenders and what that word means and what the concept is, because it's very powerful and profound. Unfortunately, if you ask me how well we're doing at McGee, I don't think we're doing very well at all, because I would like every student to graduate from McGee knowing what being a land defender is and how to do that. And until they can do that, I think George and I and Alpha, we've still got work to do. Because, yeah, as we said in the earlier session, racism never sleeps, and we shouldn't either. And so based on that, I'm mindful of the time. We're kind of wrapping up. This is another aspect. Miranda's article, if you follow up and give this a read, it's an excellent short article from, as you can see, 2 or 3 years ago. But then follow up with some of the bands. Look at some of the music that is being used there. And that the different musicians are all indigenous from different nations in Central and South America, and how they're using technology and music as part of a resurgence of indigenous politics in Central and South America. And coming back, Hero, I think you're working in a very white community, I think, in its own way over there. And for the time being, that's your place and your experience. But I think some of the music that it's just remarkable technological and technical pieces, the art and the imagery and et cetera, et cetera. Check out some of the links that are in that article. And it's
Andrew.
Yeah, go, brother.
Sorry to cut. Hero had an interesting comment to make. I was wondering, Hero, if you'd be kind enough to share it with the whole group.
Yeah. When I read Alpha's comment, I just thought in Western society, like to change your perspectives or values can be seen as a weakness of yours. So like instead, like being stubborn or try not to change your perspective is a sign of strongness. So yeah, I just thought this is the issue why people cannot reflect something on their life, because it can be seen as a weakness. So that does it make sense? Like, I just wanted to tell the difficulties of reflection and then what elements makes it difficult. And then I found that, especially in North America, like people don't want to be seen as a weak person. They want to be a strong, or like they want to be as strong as others. So it's quite toxic for me. Not toxic, sorry. It's a wrong word, but just a unique concept from my perspective.
Alpha, do you want to go for it?
Yes, I strongly agree with that. I agree with what he just said, because depending on what community you're sitting in, especially when you start to see the other side. Not only are you seen sometimes as weak, but you're seen as you become a stereotype. It becomes a stigma, or it becomes there's something that they carry on. It's almost like a sense of bullying in order for you to
Yeah.
stay within the status quo, right? So we need to, as a community, we need to reframe. Do you
Yeah.
understand what I mean? We need to start reframing, and it's not going to change immediately. You're very right about that, because we start to say, "Oh, now you're starting to go on the other side." But we should see it as, because in so many parts of society, we're looking to evolve and we're looking to grow, except to those things that make us uncomfortable. But I think that what we need to do is to reframe. And reframing means maybe it's just you and me. Then it becomes us on this platform. And then it becomes, so what happens in order to change a nation, it's not usually the whole majority changing at the same time. But some of these uprisings have started with a small university in Egypt somewhere, in Cairo, small group of people that have decided and said, this is not okay. Or it starts off with a few group of people sitting in South Africa and starts saying, this is not okay. And even though you're seen as weak, there's at the end of the day, there's a moral strength. And I want to say that our conscience has to take us hostage. What we know is right has to take us hostage in order for us to be able to move forward. But it doesn't change immediately. And I think reframing it and then standing up for what is right in the end is where we want to end up. But also we must celebrate in the small communities or where we are, we must celebrate what is good and right.
Mhm.
Right. And I think that that's the way that we have to start. Yeah, seen as weak, but we can change that one person at a time. Because at the end of the day, the truth must be fought for, and the truth will prevail.
That's a perfect way, I think, to end the series and the session, because we're out of time. The one slide I'm just going to ask you folks, if you don't mind taking a look at, is David Suzuki's Declaration of Interdependence. Type it in, and you'll be able to take a look at that. He captures many of the principles of Vandana Shiva's work, but from within the Canadian kind of perspective and context, and beyond that, of course, very, very much so. So these ideas are emerging, and they might seem, Hero, to come back to your point, as weak, but that doesn't mean to say that they're wrong. And in South Africa, when we had in the liberation struggle, the understanding was that we need to be like fleas on a dog's back, and we need to irritate the hell out of the oppressor. And it worked. And it worked took time, 40 years, but it did work. We're not there yet. We're not yet in a post-apartheid society. We're nowhere close to being a liberated society, but we are on the path, as are many people all over. The alternative is what is more of the same, more of ecological collapse, more of the post-capitalist world, or the capitalist accumulation that we have, and things like that. But small steps, small starts in your classroom, maintain yourself, survive, will be okay. And I think we should turn it over to Calvin from UBC and the Edith Lando Virtual Learning Center. Calvin, thank you so much for your guys' support and for working with us on this. It's been really, really excellent to be able to work with UBC. It's given us the scope to be able to reach colleagues on the islands and far north, on the other side of the continent, scope that we would never have had. And I found today's conversation particularly enriching, because we were able to go along and have folks from all over. And thank you everyone for joining us. I really appreciate it. And if we have another session, I really hope that we are able to meet sometime in person. But this is the best it can be, been a privilege. Over to you, Calvin. Thank you so much, brother.
For sure. So can anyone hear me?
Yep, you're good.
So a very, very big thanks to Andrew and George for basically organizing and hosting this, long and stimulating series. And a reminder to everyone that this session is recorded, and the recording will be made available on the workshop's webpage in the coming few weeks.